If you ever met a man who has revelation, if you ever met a man deep in the prophetic, if you ever man strong in deliverance, right? I can guarantee you, you're talking to a man who understands the language of God's heart. You're talking to a man that understands the language of the locals. You're talking to a man who spends time praying in the mother tongue. You understand? That's why it's so important. Paul said, man, I pray in tongues more than all y'all jokers. And I wish y'all would do it too, right? Because you build yourself up. You're edified. You're charged up. You're lifted up. And then most people want God to speak to them, but they don't spend time praying in tongues enough. Because he said that's how, remember I told you, praying in tongues is a two-way conversation. We think it's a one-way street. No, it's a two-way street. You pray, you pray, you pray, and as you're stirred up, God then speaks back to you. So even in Isaiah, it says that with stammering lips and tongue, he will then speak to his people. It says God speaks to us with a stammering lip, but you think God's speaking to you in English. It's the stammering lips represent the tongue. The rande kure me ila vanka de, that's the tongue, the stammering lip. And he says, that's Isaiah 28:11. He says, with stammering lips, I will speak to my people. But you never understood that tongues is a two-way conversation. So you never crossed the threshold where now God says, okay, I'm going to speak back to you. Let alone get to the point where now you're tapped into your spirit where you can begin to interpret. Right? Because even in interpretation isn't translated. So most people think, oh, I have to translate what was said. But the interpretation is what gives it. If I come in here and I start praying in tongues like passionately and aggressively, you could interpret my body by my body language and by my speech. Because remember, language and speech are different. But by virtue of my speech, you can interpret what I'm saying, although you may not understand everything I'm saying. Right? That's how interpreting tongues works. The gift of interpretation is that you hear it, you gather information, and you spit it back out. This is what God is saying. This is what God is doing. Right? That's the same as prophecy. Most people don't know that. When you listen, you'll hear prophets and they'll be prophesying, and sometimes, and we've experienced it. I've experienced it. You be prophesying and you kind of hit a little, you get stuck, and then you come back, you just interpreted what you prayed. The tongue just got interpreted. You just didn't know you tapped into interpreting tongues for a second. You see that? You praying, yeah, man, and God is doing this, and God is saying this, and God is going to do this, and this, and this, and hey, and this is what's going to happen. You just interpreted what happened. It just flashed, downloaded into your spirit, and you gave it back out. Because with the stammering tongue, God will speak to his people.